In this video, I'm going to show you a few quick tips and tricks for enhancing your landscapes in Affinity Photo. This is my starting image here, so you can see the colours are a bit flat and the overall image lacks a bit of punch, but with a few simple edits we can come up with something much more pleasing. So let's get cracking. This is my starting image here, and whether you're editing a RAW file or a JPEG, the best place to begin enhancing tones is usually the develop persona. Now, if you have a RAW file, then the develop persona will open automatically upon opening the RAW in Affinity Photo. But with a JPEG, we just go to the develop persona, and you can see this is the third icon in at the top left of the screen here. And this opens up a different set of panels across to the right of the screen over here. And you can see we have the enhance panel here. Here we can boost contrast, we can add a touch of clarity, which helps to pull out some detail and textures in the rocks and in the clouds here. We could also perhaps increase the vibrance a touch and the saturation. Now, while saturation targets all of the colors within the image, the vibrance slider here instead boosts the less saturated colors, so it brings out the weaker colors in the image. Now, we can also go on down here and adjust the shadows and the highlights if we like. Let's perhaps drop the highlights down a touch, see if we can pull a bit back, a bit of detail out of those bright clouds. If we like, we can lift the shadows as well, but I think I'll leave that somewhere around about there. And if we like, we can also use curves to add punch. Here in the tones tab here, we can check curves, and then you can see we can plot an S-shaped curve like this by setting 2 or 3 points on our curve line here to add punch to our image. And this also increases color saturation as well. You can see here we're able to make the shadows much deeper by dragging the bottom part of the curve line here like this, and then we can affect the highlights with the top part of the curve line. So the colors and the tones are looking a little bit more punchy now, but I'd also like to improve the sky here. So I'm going to go to the overlays tab here, and you can see at the moment we're working on the master overlay, and that effectively means our whole image here. But we can go down to the tools down here at the bottom of the overlays panel to either add a brush overlay or add a gradient overlay. So I'm going to add a gradient overlay, and then what I can do is click and drag down from the sky towards the land here. You can see this adds a pink overlay on top of my image. Now the pink area shows me what's being affected by the changes that I'm going to make in a second. So I'll drag down towards the land like this. And then once that's done, with the gradient overlay highlighted here, I can then go back into these other panels to adjust the area that we defined with the gradient. So I can go into the basic panel here, and you can see now if I go to the exposure slider here and drag that to the left, we're able to darken down the sky to make it a bit more dramatic like this. So this is often a useful edit for landscapes because skies are often much brighter than the land, so they could do with some darkening down. And we could also, if we like, add a touch of contrast into the sky as well, perhaps play with the saturation as well if we want to make those blues a bit more intense. So you can see we have lots of control over making selective adjustments with the overlays panel, and as I say, you can also use the brush overlay if you want to brush in an adjustment. So now with that done, I think I'm finished with the develop persona here. So I can click developed at the top left here, and this takes me back into the photo persona where I can continue making adjustments. Now, one thing that really helps to enhance a landscape is a little bit of selective dodging and burning to lighten or darken different elements. And we can do that here in the photo persona. So I can hit Command or Control and J. That's Command J on a Mac, Control J on Windows, and that duplicates my layer here you can see in the layers panel. And then I can grab the dodge or burn tools from the tools panel over here, so we can switch between them by clicking and holding on the tool. So let's start off with the dodge tool. And what I'd like to do is enhance the textures in the rocks here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer to the rocks, and then I can affect my brush size using the left and right square bracket keys on my keyboard. I can also target a part of the tonal range. So I want to target the highlights when using the dodge tool, and then I can just use the tool and paint over these highlights on the rocks. And you can see that allows me to just pick out those details and subtly enhance them. And I'll do the same over here. I could also do the same on this lichen on the rocks and along this edge here. And if I toggle that layer off and on, you can see how that works. Now, of course, we can also use the burn tool. So I'll grab that from the toolbar. And again, we can target the tonal range up here. So I'm going to target the shadows this time. And then I can paint to darken down some of the furrows in the rocks, just to give it a bit more depth and a bit more shape. So this is the great thing about dodging and burning landscapes. We can subtly enhance the textures like this, or we can use the tools to sort of draw the eye around the frame by darkening the areas that we want to detract from and lightening the areas that we want to draw the eye towards. So again, if I toggle that layer off and on, you can see how that just subtly enhances the shape of the rocks. Now we might also want to remove a few distracting elements in our landscape, and you can see here there are a couple of trees here on the horizon that I don't really like. I don't think they're adding anything to my composition here, particularly this little bush on the edge of the frame here. So what I'm going to do is add a pixel layer here, and then I'm going to grab the in-painting tool, which you'll find in the toolbar down here, and then I'm going to go to the options up here, make sure that this is set to current layer and below. That means I can paint on my empty layer while sampling from the layers below. And then let's zoom in nice and close. So I'm just going to zoom in here onto that bush at the edge of the screen here, and I can just use the in-painting tool to paint over the area, and you can see, simple as that, we're able to remove it. I could perhaps just try removing the top part of this bush as well, like this, and that's done a pretty good job there. Let's move along the horizon here, and I'd also like to, just for the sake of symmetry, remove the bush at this edge of the frame like this, and we'll see how that works. And that's done a pretty good job. I might want to just quickly dab over that area a little bit more to try and improve the effect, but I'm pretty happy with that. If we zoom back out and toggle that layer off and on, you can see that just cleans up my horizon and makes my composition slightly stronger. Now, another way to improve a composition is to crop, and we can grab the crop tool here from the toolbar, and then with the crop tool we have these useful overlays at the top right of the screen here. So we can set this to none, we can choose to use the rule of thirds grid to guide us in cropping, or we can perhaps go for golden spiral or diagonal. So I could try diagonals, and then I could try and line up my crop using these points over the rocks here like this. Just to crop in slightly tighter, make my central composition here perfectly central, then I hit enter to apply. And then finally, I'm going to use a quick trick to enhance the detail in the image slightly. So I need to create a merged copy of my layers here. I can do that using the keyboard shortcut Command or Control plus Shift, Alt and E, and you can see that merges a new layer in my layers panel here. And this is a merged copy of all of those layers below. Then I'm going to take this layer here into the tone mapping persona. So I can click on the tone mapping persona at the top left of the screen here. And normally this is used for sort of HDR effects, and you can see how that works over my image. The default settings there are pulling out lots of detail. Now I'm going to bring it back to its default by dragging the tone compression down to 0, and instead what I'm going to go down to is the detail refinement down here. I'm going to bring the amount up to begin with, somewhere around about 50, and then if we zoom in a little bit closer here on the rocks, and I'm going to increase the radius slightly, and you can see how that just crunches up the details and it makes those textures sort of pop out of the image a bit more. So we don't want to push this too far. Somewhere around about there I think is fine, maybe slightly lower, and I'm happy with that, so I'll hit apply. And if we just zoom in a little bit closer again and toggle that layer off and on, you can see it just crunches up those details quite nicely. So there we go, that's my finished landscape. That's a few tips and tricks for enhancing your landscapes in Affinity Photo.